I want to move right into this introduction. Chris Wilson is going to be speaking to us about the urban landscape. And Chris is the Regis Professor of Landscape Architecture Emeritus at UNM. He's the former J.B. Jackson Chair of Cultural Landscape Studies and the founder of the University of New Mexico Historic Preservation Regionalism Program. And these are just some of his major achievements of many others and books that he's written. So you want to really go on the website and look at all the things that he's done. And it's a great program that he started at UNM. And I think being the former chair of the J.B. Jackson Cultural Landscape Studies is such an important part of some of our sort of special history about cultural landscapes in Mexico. If you don't know about J.B. Jackson, what an amazing, incredible character, and how formative he was in some very special points of view about cultural landscapes. And like I was just saying to Chris, for me, New Mexico, the whole state is a cultural landscape. And I think thinking about it from the cultural landscape perspective gives us a great point of view. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Wilson. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me see, is this going to pick me up if I have it like that? No. Okay. Is that, because I don't really want to have to hold it. Is that going to come through if I speak like this? No. No. Okay, is there any? Where you want Yeah, I don't. Well, here. Okay, I guess I can hold it. Yeah, stand. Does that go tall? No, that's the same. Okay, this is great. So Jay, thanks for that introduction and for inviting me. Thanks also to Robin Jones for facilitating my participation. And I especially want to thank everybody who helped revive this conference. It's been too long apart. Thanks also to Elmo Baca, Edgar Bowles, and Steve Mofson for suggesting and providing information on some of the examples of adaptive reuse in housing, historic housing, that I'll be talking about today. There should be a handout that accompanies this talk on your table. If you haven't gotten one, Stephanie in the back corner that's waving a stack of them in her hand can provide you with one of those. And you'll see that the first part all pertain to this topic today. And I put words and phrases in bold that if you search those, that'll bring you to online sites of information and PDFs that are downloadable on different projects. And then I have modestly listed a few of my publications that I thought you might be interested in. Now, since it's been 11 years since we've had a state preservation conference, I've got to say that I know a much lower percentage of the people than I did 11 years ago. So I'd like to just get a sense of who we are and ask you to raise your hands as many times as appropriate, to give us all a sense of what our specialties are and what kind of work we're doing. Any landscape architects? Great. How about architects? Planners? Historians? No, lots of historians. That's good. How about people with college or professional degrees or professions as architects, as builders and developers? Yeah, many of the architects lifting their hands for that. How about supporters of local historic preservation organizations? Yeah, wow, that's great. Grassroots commitment. How about people in private practice or consulting work? Yeah, many of the professionals. I mean, this is an obvious one, but how about people that focus on the preservations of buildings and cultural landscapes? Yeah, most of us. But what about ephemeral culture and the conservation of a local culture where you live? How many people work or focused on that? That's great. How about people in education that are teachers? Yeah. Well, I've asked, how about people that work for federal, state, or tribal entities? Yeah, again, a lot of people. People that have worked for either the state or local Main Street programs. Yeah, a good number of those, and of course you all have a great annual conference. I'm assuming that if I say how many are historic preservationists, you all would raise your hand, given the conference. But if I define an urbanist as someone who supports the development of denser, mixed-use, pedestrian and transit-oriented neighborhoods as one alternative to auto-dependent suburbia, how many of you are urbanists? No, that's good. That's good. Not the unanimity of the preservation moniker, but my talk will address that in part today. Well, the housing crisis varies from community to community. Where there is an acute shortage of housing, as in Santa Fe, or only a moderate shortage in Albuquerque and Las Cruces, the cost of rent or the purchase price for houses and condos have now priced many people, especially younger generations, out of the market. The causes are many. We've declined in our national annual construction of housing units from a peak of 2.1 million units in 2005, and our annualized figure this year is 1.3 million, so down about a third. And this is at a time when we actually have 40 million more people in the country, and there are more households, especially because of the steady increase of single-person households. Increases in the cost of land, which have outstripped inflation in general, are a major factor in housing costs and contribute to the shortage, along with delays and outright rejections of the approval of new housing, especially from NIMBY resistance to the denser multifamily housing that I just attributed to urbanism. This morning, I'd like to explore a variety of ways that we as preservationists can help address this crisis, in particular by working to revitalize the alliance in the 1950s and 60s between preservation and urbanism. Okay, first let me briefly highlight the aspects of the history of preservation that bear on this relationship to urbanism. Beginning in the 1850s, with the national campaign to preserve George Washington's home in Mount Vernon, preservation focused on creating house museums, the houses of Revolutionary War heroes, and after the Civil War of Confederate heroes. And their homes became, analogous to a monument like the Bunker Hill obelisk. They were monuments to cultural values. And this especially meant monuments to Anglo-American elite values at a time when there was a lot of immigration from Europe, and formerly enslaved people had been freed. There we go. Now, the movement began to broaden from single buildings to district scale restoration and preservation. I think most notably in Santa Fe with the 1912 plan to recreate the city through speculative restoration and the definition of a Santa Fe revival architectural style. And then better known in the history of preservation are J.D. Rockefeller's efforts starting in the mid-1920s at Colonial Williamsburg. He actually visited Santa Fe twice in the mid-1920s to see what was up there. This was fueled by civic pride and the development of tourism, and by including districts, it included not just elite cultures of people, but it included a larger social swath. Now, suburbanization and white flight starting in the 1950s sapped the economic energy of historic city centers, while the institution of single-use zoning prohibited the sort of medium-density mixed-use buildings and districts that characterized historic cities. Meanwhile, traffic engineers emphasized the designs of streets meant solely or overwhelmingly to move vehicles, when in fact, before the automobile, streets were what you might call multifunctional infrastructure. They moved vehicles, but they were pedestrian, they were civic spaces, they were social spaces, they were like mixed-use buildings. They had multiple things going on. The urban renewal clearance of supposedly blighted urban districts and the construction of interstate highways through neighborhoods added to this assault and triggered the founding of some 200 grassroots historic preservation groups across the country in the 1950s and early 1960s. Best typified by Jane Jacobs' 1961 book, The Life and Death of Great American Cities. Jacobs opposed urban renewal and advocated for urbanism, for dense, walkable neighborhoods with lots of different housing options. Such defenses of the city also saw the flowering in the 1960s and 70s of the neighborhood association movement and the alliance between historic preservation and urbanism that I'm asserting today. This was a broader social mobilization after World War II that included the civil rights and environmental movements and saw various civil rights acts and the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, and of course the Historic Preservation Act of 1966, establishing the National Register of Historic Places. Now, in New Mexico, really the first generation of registrations focused on well-known landmark buildings such as the Los Trompos Church, historic districts, especially ones that had begun developing some tourism. So Taos, Santa Fe, Mesilla, which we see here. When historic residential sections were nominated, they usually were middle or upper class neighborhoods. These had buildings that had more detailing, that had been modified less. And in Albuquerque, that meant the Highlands neighborhood and the downtown neighborhood. Working class neighborhoods such as Wells Park and Bareilles, where people built and modified their own houses over time, were seen in historic preservation terms as having lost historic integrity, and they didn't attract attention. And it was, probably took a full generation of the National Register before people began to pay attention to multifamily housing, such as the courtyard housing in the Reynolds neighborhood due west of downtown Albuquerque. Now, the renewal of an interest in urbanism, catalyzed by the founding of the Congress for the New Urbanism in 1992, and then other smart growth and sustainable cities movements, also critiqued the shortcomings of suburbia. While New Urbanists first became known for their design of greenfields towns, such as Seaside, Florida, they actually preferred old buildings and old neighborhoods, and wherever possible, they emphasized preservation and adaptive reuse. It's just that their work in cities was more incremental and was not as flashy as, say, Seaside or Kentlands. They particularly lamented the reduction of housing types after the Second World War. And they looked to pre-automobile settlements and building types for more sustainable models of development. In the 1980s, for instance, 3 University of Southern California professors studied and published this great book on courtyard housing in Los Angeles, a building type that had died out after the Second World War. From their start in 1993, did I just say 2? No, I did not. I'm not sure which it was exactly. They explicitly called for more housing types, variety of housing types, the inclusion of smaller and more affordable units, which in our current day of perhaps a third of households being single-person households, we're still buying, and I say multifamily housing, which implies a certain type of multi-room unit, but single resident housing is certainly very important. One of their other concepts that emerged in the 1990s was the idea of the regional transect, which is the pre-automobile pattern of a dense city center, neighborhood centers, out to suburbia, but on to agricultural and natural lands. But the historic fact and the desirability of coordinating densities, streets, park types for which point in the transect you were. If you're in the city center, you don't put a service station right in the middle of there. Suburbia is okay, but you want to have denser neighborhoods that are pedestrian and transit oriented. Now, I've used the term building type a couple of times, and what exactly do I mean? Building types originally developed pragmatically over decades, sometimes over centuries, to address and reconcile a whole set of structural, climatic, economic factors. And once arrived at, they're passed on in the culture from generation to generation through lived everyday experience and through the construction of new buildings that follow this mental cultural template. The Spanish-Mexican courtyard house type, please, if I go on to another topic and I haven't changed the slide, somebody feel free to shout out. So this, when I say these 3 examples from Mexico City, San Diego, and Tucson, it'll make more sense with this slide, consist of rooms 1 room deep arranged around the courtyard, which serves as a cool outdoor living space and the circulation between the individual rooms, each of which has a door opening onto the courtyard. In urban settings, rooms are sometimes doubled up with doors and windows, both outside and inside. And in urban areas, this facilitated incorporating shops into the building, as we saw in Beverly Spears' example of the Gallegos house in Villanueva yesterday. The Euro-American row house, by comparison, usually consisted of 1 or 1.5 room wide houses built side by side to get the maximum number of units on the building site. Each house had a stoop and door, windows to the front, and windows and access to a small walled yard to the back. So that's a verbal literacy and education way of building. And then the rise of education and systematic business methods, especially in the last 2 centuries, led to building types that became formalized in their components prescribed in house pattern books and planning codes taught in architectural schools, at least until the rise of modernism, and used by financial institutions to evaluate proposed construction projects. So for instance, on the left, a floor plan for either a side-by-side duplex, or it could be stacked to 2 stories, as you see in the image above, to create a fourplex. Or more recently, form-based codes that prescribe the organization of the functions and massing of a building type to coordinate the definition of the streets and public spaces in between. So I'd like to now survey multifamily or multi-unit housing, historically in New Mexico, and then nationally as well, just to give us a vocabulary. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's, so that, you know, those bungalows near UNM, we're not going to stand in for Pueblo architecture. So, here an example of a multifamily house type in the Southwest, recorded by the Historic American Building Survey in 1934 at Acapulco, Pueblo. In a sense, this is a cousin of a row house. It's a one-room wide house built shoulder to shoulder with the neighborhoods, oriented for solar gain to the southeast, with rooftop terraces that form very important living spaces for the family. Or that Spanish courtyard housing type in Santa Fe, growing incrementally a room or two at a time, as Beverly described yesterday, to form linear forms, and then turning the corner to make L or U-shaped forms. And if you notice in the 1766 map above, there's a sequence of attached U and L-shaped buildings along San Francisco Street that 80 years later all had developed incrementally into full courtyard houses. Now, one of the great things about this house type and many vernacular house types is that they're built for adaptation. They're built to be subdivided to match the changing demographics of a household or of a neighborhood. And so, for instance, on the upper left, a house here in Las Vegas, about on South Pacific Street, about 3 blocks south of the plaza where the street jogs, a full courtyard house built in the 1850s by a well-to-do family, but by 1918, as that family had moved on to, you know, more railroad era housing, it had become an apartment building. And the multiple doors made it very easy to create 5 apartments in that setting. Or on lower San Francisco Street in Santa Fe, you see the courtyard houses, in some cases doubled up so they could have a shop opening to the street, residences behind. You know, there's a whole, I mean, I don't know, the D is dwellings, the S are shops. You know, there are many, many housing and, you know, and adaptable commercial units in that location. And I'll just say that urban renewal in the 1950s and 60s wiped out this kind of multi-unit housing in Santa Fe, as in many other places. Now, as Beverly suggested, the officers' houses at Fort Marcy and other U.S. forts right after the Civil War introduced the idea of the freestanding single-family house. Oh, sorry. Oh. Oh, no, that I wanted that. I'm sorry, I don't have the officer's house here, but I probably shouldn't have mentioned that. Because you are seeing that Anglo-American freestanding single-family house as a pattern on Upper Palace Avenue. And then even when Santa Fe turned to regional style architecture, it was predominantly suburban and single-family. And this was a design competition on the lower right from 1919. Let alone the bungalow neighborhood south of UNM and all of suburbia in which single-family houses freestanding predominate. Now, within railroad towns, there were examples of mixed use and multifamily housing, of course. Business blocks with shops on the ground floor, and either the shopkeeper's family house or apartments above. And then in the neighborhoods with freestanding houses, and then there were multifamily, multi-unit types that clustered around downtowns, boarding houses, row houses. These are examples in Albuquerque. And over here on Douglas at 12th, there's a very similar row house building. In the single-family neighborhoods, it was quite common to have what we in New Mexico would call casitas, granny flats. Planning code now calls them auxiliary dwelling units. An easy way to add units historically and today that fits into the existing neighborhood. And I'll just point out the example on the right is the West Side Guadalupe neighborhood in Santa Fe, and a vernacular builder, Jose Trujillo, who built a series of courtyards and compounds and houses and duplexes. And we're seeing about a quarter of what he built, and it's his own house with a 3-room casita to the rear. Inspired by the local Hispanic tradition of extended family compounds, members of the Santa Fe Art Colony developed walled residential courtyards on the east side in the 1920s and 30s, which were usually referred to as plazas. They occupied agricultural land that had been subdivided in long linear fashion, so the most common form is a road down the middle of one of those previous long lot fields with houses along the side, although some of them built into larger compounds with apartment casitas as well as the owner's house to welcome friends visiting from the east, or in the case of the Webster compound on the right, housing for unmarried mothers. In addition, nationally popular types were also built and seen in New Mexico. The duplex is probably the numerically most common. 2 units in one building or on one lot, organized in a variety of ways, as you see in the diagram on the left. The most common is a side-by-side duplex, whether 1 story or 2 stories. And my Chicago and Pasadena examples are side-by-side, whereas the Dallas example is a stacked duplex with 2 doors, one of which leads to the ground floor unit, and the other leads up to a similar floor plan for the upper unit. And then, of course, taking the duplex and stacking it up, as we saw in the building type example that I showed before. And these are examples in Pasadena. The thing about many of these multifamily housing types, certainly the duplexes, the 4 flats, they're built in the form of a single-family house. They respect the setback of the other houses in the neighborhood. They often have detailing that matches that, or is similar to that of the single-family houses. So historically, and again today, this is a way to get more units into a neighborhood while respecting the pre-automobile, I'll say suburban single-family house neighborhood type. And just to give you an example of how these types, before the Federal Housing Administration and mortgage loan guarantees starting in 1934, construction was piecemeal. You didn't get big subdivisions. You got individual builders building a few houses. And so here on, it's a South Capitol neighborhood, but but notice we have so we've got duplexes on the lower right here, and then here are two lots that have two floor flats facing the street, and then a later bar building that has 5 efficiency apartment units and garages, and that actually creates a pretty great density. Before, when I had single-family houses up, I think I suggested that they tended to be 4 to 8 dwelling units an acre, just to give you a benchmark. And of course, this question of dwelling units and density is important, because if you have a higher number of dwelling units an acre, the cost of the land is split between more units. And so the proportion of cost going into land is reduced. And so not every last multi-unit example I have, but many of them, I'm giving you the dwelling units per acre to give you a sense of the efficiencies. The South Capitol neighborhood has about 7 dwelling units an acre on 50-foot wide by 150-foot deep lots. And see, these 2 lots have 8 units in the 4 flats and 5 apartments in the rear, and that works out to 32 dwelling units an acre. And so at the front, it's maintaining the rhythm of the single-family houses, but in fact, it's got quite a few housing units. Another type that maybe pushes this is a single-family house vocabulary is the double-loaded corridor, or an apartment building with a corridor down the middle with apartments to either side. There are regional, as we saw with the Santa Fe housing plazas, there are Southwest regional housing types, multi-unit housing types, that in the period when the California mission style, the Spanish revival, the Spanish Pueblo revival styles were flourishing in the 1920s and 30s, there were actually multi-unit housing types and forms of development that were grounded in the Spanish tradition. And so one that is called the callejon, or an alley, a residential alley, a muse we might call it in English, a road down the middle of the lawn and smaller compact houses with walled courtyards. It's a type that continued to be built in Santa Fe off of Alba Fria, Franklin Place, just west of St. Michael's Drive, for instance, and we're seeing that development on the right. A famous one from Southern California, the bungalow court, which is marrying the desire for an individual family house to a Spanish courtyard like arrangement. There are no bungalow courts that I know in Albuquerque, but just as an efficient way of developing land, people sometimes took corner lots and they put usually a set of 4 shotgun houses or 4 small bungalows facing the side street. So in a sense, it's half of a bungalow court on a side lot. And what we've got examples in Union Highlands and the Reynolds edition. Now, connecting the individual units of the bungalow court provided for the definition of a clear definition of a courtyard. In its simplest form, it could fit 8 or 10 units on 2 city lots, as we see on the right, or some slightly more ample courtyards in the Union Highlands and Reynolds editions of Albuquerque. Now, the courtyard housing type really flourished in Los Angeles, Hollywood, Pasadena. It's much more lavish. Each unit, as in the Spanish tradition, has an entrance onto the courtyard. And so the courtyard is place, circulation place. It's a shared, I'll call it a semi-public amenity. The units it's one unit wide, which means that every room has natural light and there's cross ventilation and access to the wonderful cooling landscaped courtyard. Yeah. And then an interesting type that flourished very briefly before suburbanization took over, and it's essentially duplexes arranged around a court. And I'm showing one on Garcia Street in Santa Fe and one on Martin Luther King Avenue in Albuquerque, and these are circa 1950 projects. Now, this variety of nationally popular and regionally specific multi-unit housing types, and I'd say that from my field work around the country and in Canada, most cities of any size had somewhere between 6 and 10 multi-unit building types that were being built in the 1920s and 30s. Now, after the Second World War, things were simplified radically. It had to do with the rise of what Christopher Lineberger has termed standard real estate product types. These are the things that banks would fund. And so shopping centers, big box, strip commercial, office, industrial, warehouse parks, the predominant single-family suburban subdivision funded all as one big project predominated. And those multi-unit housing types in most areas were reduced to garden apartments with parking around kind of a court arrangement. And in some areas there were auto-serving row house compounds as well. But note, if you can read Lineberger's table, that the new urbanism, reurbanization movement that had been going about 15 years when he wrote this, he calls out mixed-use urban as a product type and urban high-density apartments. So reurbanization was starting to make inroads and developing larger but urban scaled building types. As I noted in looking at Lower San Francisco Street in Santa Fe, Urban Renewal took out a lot of the multifamily housing that actually existed. The flop houses, the boarding houses, the single resident occupancy hotels of Skid Row, which we're seeing on the left here in Albuquerque, but then a few blocks away, the kind of mixture of apartment buildings, duplexes, bar, courtyard buildings, and larger houses subdivided over time to create more apartments. That whole kind of affordable mixed-use housing stock in most cities over, say 30,000 people, most of that got wiped out by urban renewal. And that was in part the genesis of our homelessness problem. Okay, now, what are some of the strategies that we as historic preservationists and maybe urbanists who support the development of denser mixed-use, pedestrian and transit-oriented neighborhoods, what are some of the strategies that we can follow? As noted, multi-unit types tended not to get as much attention from National Register programs as elite neighborhoods. So one thing is we could go back and make sure that all the good historic multi-unit housing gets registered. And the state might consider doing a multi-property thematic forum on multi-unit housing, say 1880 to 1940 in New Mexico, to facilitate individual property owners and local city governments registering and valorizing and celebrating this this history. And certainly there are people in individual communities and in the state office that have nominated multi-unit types, but this would be a way to be a little more systematic about it. Of course, the preservation, the maintenance, the adaptive reuse of historic buildings for multi-unit housing is, our kind of our main strategy or modus operandi. And I'll just quickly profile 4 examples from around the state. One that Elmo Baca mentioned yesterday, and that's the Rollins building, which on the 2nd floor had housing for Harvey girls working in the Castaneda across the street. What am I saying here? The 14 rooms that they had been remodeled into 5 apartments. Or the Hotel Clovis, which operated until 1983, and then it took whatever that is, 26 years until it was adapted. It was, anticipated. The state sent a couple of young consultants down there, David Cameron and yours truly, to prepare a National Register nomination on the building the year after it closed as a hotel. But any of you that have worked on these kind of projects know how many moving parts there are, how many organizations and private developers and funding sources have to be tapped to make something like this operate. And so the list here, which is not even exhaustive, is similar to what you face if you've done projects like this. Or sometimes it's not just the creation of housing, but it's addressing social service needs and special populations in our local community. And so this redesign of the Luna Lodge from a motel into affordable housing with support services for people with disabilities is a great project. Or the Alvado Motel on Central over 66 near the river in Albuquerque that operated for whatever that is, 75 years. When it was closed as a motel, a developer purchased it and announced that he was going to level the site to build condos. The city intervened, bought the property, reconditioned it as a boutique motel for a kind of heritage Route 66 tourism niche, but also added a tap room, some shops, public event space. And it's one of 3 motels that are still there, another one operating as a motel, although that's housing. But the city's, in a sense, seen this as a catalyst for redevelopment, rezone the land around it for higher density infill, as you're seeing on the lower right. So using, this is where the preservation of, auto-oriented and suburban development, maybe you don't want to preserve all of it because it's not that efficient in terms of use of energy, but you can use key buildings, preserve those, use those as a catalyst for denser infill development. Casitas, ADUs, which I mentioned, an easy way to quickly get more housing in. And the problem with much of this, infill and multifamily housing, as I alluded to in my opening, is that there are zoning codes, there are historic design review districts, there are multiple impediments to getting these things built. You go a year, 2 years, sometimes you don't get approval. That adds to the cost of the construction. So working through and streamlining guidelines, having a public planning process that comes to a point of people saying, Yeah, in this neighborhood, even this historic neighborhood, if you do certain things, ADUs should just, quickly go through the review process so they can get built. And that means not only things in the kind of the historic style of the neighborhood, but both Tucson and the state of California have approved prefab ADU units for use in those two locations. There's been a revival of some of the multifamily housing types. In Southern California, the Mal and Palazzotti's firm not only revived the building type, but they also had to figure out, and they actually had to become developers of this first courtyard housing project in 4 decades, because they couldn't get normal developers and financial institutions to do it. So there's a lot of pioneering work that the new urbanists did. We're here in the Human Highlands neighborhood of Albuquerque, next to Grand Boulevard. Developer Sean Gilligan and Gifford architectural firm. And these are efficiency apartments. This is addressing that 1 or 2 person household need. Nice courtyard inside, and a higher density 40 dwelling unit an acre affordable project. Well, not that our cities and real estate markets support this, but it's possible to do high quality projects that push up to 50 dwelling units an acre. They require subterranean parking structures. The first 2 floors are 2-story units entered from the courtyard, and then there's an elevator up and balconies and exterior courtyards above that lead to the other units. Or this great affordable housing project, 31 units, 4 side-by-side duplex craftsman units facing the street, and then essentially kind of a row house organization of the other units to create 2 amenity courtyards to the rear. Now, those of you that live in Santa Fe or maybe in the surrounding area may have picked up on the HomeWise, a nonprofit affordable housing organization in Santa Fe, has a wonderful lecture series, the HomeWise Livability Speaker Series, and that's on the sources that I gave you, and I'd strongly recommend attending that. And if you Google the words that I gave in your list there, you can access their series of now about 20 speakers, national and regional experts on various issues pertaining to creating affordable housing. You can catch up. For instance, the most recent talk was by Daniel Poloric, who is the author of Missing Middle Housing. He's a second-generation new urbanist. He's using that new urbanist transect idea to say these multi-family housing types fit in the transect from the dense city out to single-family houses in suburbia. We're reviving these types. We can combine them. We can hybridize them. There's often wariness about these types. And so, for instance, his Chicago office worked with people in South Bend. I'm going to take 2 minutes to rush through, sorry. To create pre-approved community consensus infill multi-family building types, which reduces the cost of construction of infill. Sorry?
The bound flag in front of your mouth.
Oh, okay, sorry. They've also worked with 18 communities around Chicago to create a toolkit for missing middle housing. And I would say it might be a good idea for the state of New Mexico to see if there are communities around the state that would like to work on creating consensus, streamlining the process to get missing middle housing built, and produce a toolkit for that in New Mexico. A great HomeWise project that combines types, including casitas, I'm just showing using multiple housing types to fit into a historic context. In this case, a business block, courtyard housing, duplexes, single-family houses. I won't go into this since I've run out of time, but one that also combines in Albuquerque multiple housing types. 2 sentences of conclusion, and so some of you, like Emil Baca, in his role as head of the Las Vegas Community Foundation, are working directly on addressing the housing shortage question. I hope that this survey of pre-World War II mixed-use multi-unit housing and examples of contemporary initiatives make the rekindling of the relationship and alliance between preservation and urbanism seem more possible and desirable. Thank you.